living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
If you had a mental health problem, where would you go for help? And would you go to church for that help? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and this is Relationship Prescriptions. About 1 in 4 of us will have a mental health problem at some point. So common. And where will you go if you are one of those people that face such a problem? And if it's not you, it's very likely that somebody you love and care for, somebody close to you, will have that kind of a problem. Depression, anxiety, just not able to handle life. So many experience those kinds of problems. And where do you go for help? Now, there's controversy in our world today about whether that frequency that seems to be increasing is increasing because we just talk about it more, or whether there are really more triggers in our world to create a higher incidence of these kinds of problems. And then, what do we do to help people who are struggling with these issues? My friend Vicky Coffee is addressing these issues every day. She has been with the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health in Austin, Texas since 2007. She has served as an executive board member for the National Leadership Council on African American Behavioral Health. She deals with setting up programs to improve the mental health and well-being of individuals, especially in Texas, but around the country. And she is the liaison between the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health and faith communities, churches. She has a deep faith herself. I know that this conversation about mental health and emotional wellness and faith communities, Christianity, and so on, will be so fruitful. So here is my conversation with Vicky Coffee. Well, Vicky, I consider you a friend. It's been quite some time since we first met years ago. Thank you so much for being on our program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Hogg Foundation for Mental Health is a place you have connected with, I believe, for like 13 years now, a Texas organization, but has such a strong history in the mental health arena. And I'd just like to start by asking you, how did this topic of mental health and wellness and recovery, that whole area, how did that become something that was important to you personally?
You know, that's an interesting question. I think probably since the time I was a young person or a teenager, I was that one that friends would come to when they needed support, or just someone to talk to if they were struggling with their parents or breaking up with their boyfriend or something like that. And so that, I think, was kind of my introduction into the mental health field pretty young. I also come from a family where social service was really important in giving back to the community. And my mother worked in the social services field for many years. And I just felt like my responsibility in life as a human was to care about others and support them as best I could. And then, of course, getting into college and undergraduate, I was very interested in children's child development, and felt like I should go on and get a master's. And so counseling popped up as one of the options. And I thought, I think I could do that for a lifetime. So I went for it.
Yeah. Has there been any personal experiences where you needed to be aware of this, either for your own benefit or for your family's benefit? You mentioned that your mother worked in this area, but mental health issues are such a common thing. And sometimes people go into an area because it's impacted them personally.
Yes, it did and has and probably will continue for as long as I'm living. I actually had an uncle, my mother's younger brother, who lived with schizophrenia. And so I would experience our family coming together and trying to figure out the best way to support him. Oftentimes he would isolate and sometimes leave and go and live in obscure places, and we would have to find him and figure out the best way to get him the help that he needed. And so that definitely would be a personal testimony or experience that I have with a family member.
Yeah. I was talking with a friend just yesterday. She has a son who has a history of a number of mental health challenges, and including substance abuse, addiction on top of that combination.
Mhm.
And in his 30s, she and her husband are really wrestling with how to find the care that their son needs. And both it's impacting their family, and how does the church help, and it can be a real ongoing struggle for families where this is a problem.
Absolutely. And I would say with the prevalence of mental illness, that it really, there aren't very many families, if any, that are not impacted by a loved one who can experience some mental distress from time to time. And when you love someone, I think the hardest part is staying neutral enough to get them the support that they need, because it becomes a very emotional journey for you as a parent or a sibling who is just seeing someone struggling so hard to be emotionally well, but just having challenges connecting with the right either treatment opportunity or having access to something that will be really helpful for them in their journey.
I hadn't thought about it until our conversation, but this almost has a feeling of the secondary victim, the doctor part of me. When we deal with patients who have had a serious injury or a disaster or whatever, the medical personnel who are caring for them in those really difficult times can be impacted so deeply as well. And not I don't like the victim language, but just to acknowledge that those around somebody, that the ones who care for them, their loved ones, the family, even the community, really does have an effect with when these illnesses impact someone.
Absolutely. Again, when you think of someone, particularly a child or a sibling or a spouse, even that is experiencing some real emotional challenges, it can be very taxing on you as a support system. And so there has been a lot of work. NAMI, which you may be familiar with, I'm sure, the National
Yes.
Alliance on Mental Illness, has done a really good job with trying to develop a support system for people who love someone who is experiencing a mental health condition, and just learning how to walk along beside them. Because, of course, the stress that you experience for someone that you love, as they're hurting, can really take its wear and tear on you as an individual and as a family.
And it impacts your ability to then support your loved one in the way that they need it most.
Absolutely. Just compassion fatigue alone, and again caring, but having to still go to work every day, and or go to school, and to be able to function within your own responsibilities when you have someone that may be calling you frequently, or someone who needs additional support, and you're really just concerned that they're going to want to continue living, and that they have the energy and strength to just get from day to day as they go through their journey and struggle. It can really take its toll on those who love individuals that are struggling.
Yeah. There has been some talk in the media in the last few years about how common these mental health challenges are. Depression, anxiety, probably being statistically the most common. And then, of course, there are a number of others. You've been in this field for some time, Vicki. Do you see it that those statistics demonstrate we are becoming a less mentally well culture? Is it that we're more aware? Numbers only tell part of the story, but that makes me wonder sometimes.
That's a very common question, and I know, just here at the foundation, as well as just in general, that's a very common question. And I would say yes and yes. Honestly, I think with social media and the internet and just the up-to-minute news that we get at our fingertips, and being able to Google everything,
Yeah.
we're just a more informed society in general. But I think when you drill down and you really look at more research and recent studies, Americans are suffering from mental and emotional distress in increased numbers, and more than we have in the past. Matter of fact, the American Psychological Association published research recently that shows that been an increase, particularly around youth and around young people. Of course, they are experiencing some certain types of mental disorders, as you mentioned, like anxiety and depression, at significantly higher rates than they have in the past. This past decade, we've seen an increase.
Why do you think that is? I tend to have some, emotional responses to that. I can imagine some things, but what do we know about what the triggers are for that kind of an increase?
I think that is just it's a multifaceted answer, and just it's so many things that play into that. With young people, of course, the most obvious would be just the impact of the digital world that we live in today.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just in a world where social media permeates everything. And so I know growing up as a child, even things like bullying, we hear about the impact that bullying has on young people. Back in the day, if we were being bullied, you could leave that at school. And when you got home or you went to church, you were away from that. But now with the digital world that we live in, cyberbullying is so prevalent, and there's no escape from that. You think, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to go home and I'm away from this. But if you get online, someone can either go on Snapchat and start bullying you, or go to Facebook or whatever young people are using today. And so it's like there's no escape from that. And so I think even looking at digital media as well, looking at the online me versus the real person, and knowing that it looks like everybody's happy and living lives that are just so great. You see them camping and swimming and going to parties and boating and all these things that you're not getting to do, right? And so as a young person living in a world where they constantly are bombarded with these messages that everybody's life is great and happy, that can really have an impact on one's emotional wellness as well. I also think that there's just a bigger issue around access. So having access to resources and supports that are relevant, both culturally as well as just ones that young people feel like they're being heard and listened, and are getting their needs met, that it's challenging because of a number of reasons, either health insurance or lack thereof. For people that live in rural communities, that's a challenge. So there's so many things that impact, I think, our emotional and mental wellness today.
The area of faith, understand one of your roles at the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health is to be a liaison with faith communities and support them as they seek to support those in their faith community. And I know that there has been, I guess you could say, some controversy about the role of faith and mental wellness or lack thereof. And I know you're a person of faith. What role do you see faith playing in this scenario?
Oh my goodness, there is a huge connection between faith and spirituality and mental health. So as people of faith, we believe in mind, body, and spirit, or mind, body, and soul. And so when we're experiencing emotional distress, oftentimes, really usually, the place of worship is the first place a person might turn, or they may go to their faith leader or pastor or clergy. And so for people who live with a mental health condition, faith really can serve as a tool that can help with their recovery and healing.
Yeah.
In some cases, in some cultures, faith can be a real protective factor that can help individuals as well as their family members just to develop that strength that we need to stay hopeful, also to develop just the resiliency that it takes to survive those highs and lows that I mentioned earlier and that we talked about, that can really accompany a crisis or just supporting someone who lives day to day with mental health conditions.
Yeah. Do you see any areas where I'm going to use the word religion as opposed to faith, but just the way religion has been implemented in some ways? Do you see any places where that has created some roadblocks or challenges for mental health?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The same way that faith can be a protective factor and serve as a support, honestly, it can also be a hindrance for individuals' mental health journey. And the worship environment can actually even contribute to the shame and stigma that someone might have living with a mental health condition. And I think that happens a lot of times when faith leaders and faith communities are just not equipped or educated about mental illness and health, and they don't recognize how simple things like language or even touch can impact or hinder a person's mental state. oftentimes the worship experience that's created can be judgmental, and it can blame people who are experiencing a mental health challenge. Like I mentioned, just language can that's used to define people who are experiencing a mental health condition, like crazy, and saying things that people are
Mm-hmm.
evil or demon possessed with spirits. Those can really hit a person hard and impact their emotional status. And when somebody is already experiencing emotional turmoil or distress, and they finally build up this courage, like, I'm going to go talk to my faith leader or my
Yeah.
pastor,
Yeah.
and they're told when they get there, you just need to pray harder, or your faith is not strong enough, young man, go back and read your Bible.
Mm.
Those are the kind of statements that can have a lasting impression on how an individual or a family member even perceives their place of worship, and whether or not they choose to get help. And the help that they need can actually delay someone getting the treatment and support they need, which of course delays their healing process.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a double-edged sword. Our places of worship can be a hindrance sometimes as well.
I recently spoke with a middle-aged lady who has become part of my online community, and she was telling me how many people she has gone to uh, trying to get help for her mental illness. And when she described the messages she was getting from, like, pastors and so on, it was just that you referenced, just pray harder and be in the word more,
Mhm.
for those communities that use that kind of language. And if you just had more faith. Exactly. I hear that this friend is the one that comes to mind right now, but I hear from people regularly about that, and my heart breaks because there's so much more that can be done.
Absolutely. When I think particularly of communities of color, the church is the one place that is oftentimes the pillar in those communities, and is the one place that people go to for comfort and for hope. And when you go to a place of worship and it tends to be, more negative in nature, and one that, again, it's not about blaming or shaming the church. People just don't understand. And so there are ways that we can do a better job in our faith communities. And so our focus at the foundation, as well as work we've done nationally, there's lots of effort focused on supporting churches in learning and becoming those places where people can, in fact, um, get better and heal and recover, because people can recover from mental health conditions. It's very possible, and churches have such a key role and can do such a great job in supporting those the wellness of people.
Thank you for saying that it is possible to recover from mental illness. Now, we're not predicting a certain person's future for any one individual who's listening, but just that message that it is possible to recover and to have a full and meaningful life, even with one of these diagnoses, that it's not a forever label.
Absolutely.
That's something that I see people struggling with a lot.
Absolutely, because I think the pain and the depth of um, work that it takes to stay focused and to stay hopeful about recovery and becoming well. It's like anything else. I think a medicine, of course, is a science, and we know that we try different things to help people get better. That may be medication, that may be talk therapy, that may be, of course, one's place of worship. I think we just have to recognize and understand that recovery looks different for different people. And so when we say recovery, it doesn't mean that you're symptom or free and you're completely well without anything ever happening again. That happens for some people, but it's just like anything else that you live with, like diabetes or high blood pressure. You learn the strategies and the mechanisms, coping mechanisms that it takes to be well, either not eating certain foods, or exercising, or whatever it is. Those same strategies can work for someone who is experiencing a mental health condition. And so when we talk about churches and places of worship supporting a person's mental health and wellness, oftentimes we'll say we want mental illness to become one of those casserole illnesses where if a person lives with and experiences a crisis, the same way the church rallies around and prays and takes casseroles or those lovely pound cakes to
Right.
the individual and the family, we want people that live with a mental health condition to have that same type of love and support and understanding as other physical health conditions.
That's a great analogy. That is so good. You've mentioned something in passing a couple times that I hope our listeners have picked up on, and that is that the role of community can actually make a difference in a person's recovery, not only by the specific things that they do, which are super important, but just by the connection. You probably are aware, Vicki, of the research in the last number of years on loneliness and what that does to both our physical and our mental health. Having a community of faith to connect with honestly makes a difference in a person's well-being.
Absolutely. And I think about the population of our elderly population,
Mm-hmm.
where isolation is so common, and that just changes in our ability to move and do the things, that quality of life changes that someone experiences as they age.
Mm-hmm.
It's so critical that individuals are not isolated and they don't feel left, like there's no one that they can talk to. Just depression socially, that can be experienced by someone who doesn't have the same level of or the ability to reach out and connect and drive to different things that happen at church or different events in the community. Those things can definitely impact individuals. And so when we start looking at ways that churches can be supportive and offer solutions for individuals who are feeling isolated or even experiencing mental health conditions, there are so many ways, in simple, small ways, that churches can be supportive just by being a friend. And there was a campaign for many years about being a friend to someone who lives with a mental health condition,
Mm-hmm.
because again, it goes back to that isolation that you mentioned in regards to our elderly population.
Yeah. Anything else that churches and communities of faith can do that's helpful? You've mentioned some, but I just wanted to ask you that in an explicit way.
Absolutely. How much time do we have?
That's kind of your sweet spot, isn't it? That's what you
That's
love to
right.
do.
Absolutely. We have really worked over the years to try and help churches learn just tons of ways that they can be supportive, like, because churches are key and they're in someone's, again, recovery and wellness. And so many of the strategies don't involve a lot of money or lots of time, but they can just make a huge impact on supporting individuals that live with mental health conditions and their family members. And so one of the things that I think is critical is that faith leaders and church communities just really learning to recognize how they can decrease stigma and increase awareness about mental health. And so just education of our clergy and our faith leaders and our ministry leaders, it's important because they set the tone for the worship environment. And so educating them is critical, and educating the congregation as a whole. There are quite a few training curriculums and materials that are specifically geared to teach faith communities about mental health, that help faith communities learn how to recognize signs and symptoms of when a congregant may be experiencing a mental health crisis or a condition, and also equipping them with the resources and the contacts in the community so that they can assist the person. So again, recognizing that faith communities and leaders don't have to be the experts, that there are experts oftentimes in their congregations that can help them identify and even create a resource list that they can share with congregants about where they can go to get support. Also, just being mindful of our language again and how we refer to people. I know there's been instances where some of the churches that we've worked with have said that their pastor or church leader has made the comment from the pulpit, saying someone's crazy or a lunatic, or referring to them as mentally ill, and even making the suggestion that medications don't work. And so you don't need to throw away your medication bottle, just drop it at the altar because we're going to pray for you and things are going to change. And so just being more mindful of the influence that they have as a faith leader. And then simple things like offering free space at the church for support groups to meet, such as NAMI, and that we mentioned earlier, or even offering to host trainings for the community and the church about mental health. There's an 8-hour curriculum that's taught called Mental Health First Aid that has been nationally utilized to teach people about mental health the same way that you would how to support someone with first aid if they're experiencing a physical crisis. Mental health first aid supports individuals who are experiencing a mental health crisis until they can get the proper support they need. So there are just lots of different ways that churches can support individuals. And really it has to do with education and awareness first. And so not necessarily being a provider of service, but just helping people learn how to be more caring and understanding and accepting of people that live with mental health differences.
Oh, I love that. And you can hear your passion as you talk about that, Vicki. It's great to hear that. I know a number of listeners who themselves struggle with anxiety and depression and related mental health challenges. And they may be listening and say, well, I wish my church, would be more welcoming, or I don't feel like I really can go to church because it's not a very friendly place for me to address my challenges. And we acknowledge that some of that can be part of their experience, but what would you say to somebody who feels stuck like that?
I would say the first thing that I would say is that if you have the strength to be that voice, to be that advocate for yourself, as well as for other people, we know that research shows that 1 in 5, some even shows that 1 in 4 people live with a mental health condition or will experience a mental health condition at some point in their life. And so what I like to tell people is if you go to your church, depending on how large it is, and you look and sit on your pew, chances are 8 to 10 people are on that pew, if not 20 in some instances. There may be a number of people sitting on the same pew with you who are experiencing similar experiences that you are. And so if you can take that extra step, there are oftentimes health ministries within most churches and places of worship. And so I encourage you to go and speak with the ministry leader for your health ministry and talk with them and say, we talk a lot about the physical health conditions that people have, but that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people live with mental health conditions. And I would like to encourage you, and I would even volunteer to help us start doing a better job at our church in educating and learning about mental health. So that would be the first step.
Great. We are going to link to NAMI in the show notes for this podcast. You've mentioned that a couple times, and great organization. I can certainly second that, as well as to the Hogg Foundation for Mental Health. They have some great program services. If you happen to be a leader in a faith community, certainly a great place to access for some of the support there. Vicki, I feel like we could talk a whole lot longer. This has been really encouraging, and I want to thank you for the work you continue to do in bringing faith communities and those who need these kinds of support, help together. I believe this can be a great demonstration of the kind of wholeness, the whole person wellness that Jesus really desires for all of us.
Absolutely. And I thank you for just always being mindful and bringing in the conversation about mental health. It's important. And churches do have an obligation, since we are the place where people go for hope and healing. We do have an obligation to our congregants to be more educated and to be more compassionate when it comes to talking about mental health. I thank you for looping people into NAMI FaithNet, which is a specific interfaith resource network, a part of the NAMI family. And I just thank you for connecting people to NAMI FaithNet. And as always, reaching out to the Hogg Foundation. We're continuing to fight that fight. And as long as I'm here, I feel like it's my calling. And so feel free to call on me anytime.
We'll do that. And that FaithNet section of NAMI will definitely make that its own definite link in the show notes. Thank you, Vicki. This has been such a great conversation, and God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Carol. You as well.
I hope that conversation was as encouraging to you as it was to me. We in the body of Christ can do better in supporting each other with mental health challenges, but also there's so much hope. The body of Christ does have so many resources to help each other. If you are struggling with a mental health challenge and where you are now is not giving you the kind of support that you need, don't give up. Reach out. Check out another community of faith, another church, or whatever. The online resources that Vicki mentioned, NAMI and NAMI FaithNet. NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and then their faith Christian section there is NAMI FaithNet. We'll make sure those links are in the show notes. You can go to NAMI.org or NAMI.org/NAMI FaithNet, and so much good information there. Encouragement for those who are struggling with mental health issues themselves, and also a great number of resources for churches, community of faith, leaders to make how we relate to each other in the body of Christ more welcoming, more helpful to those who are struggling in these ways. Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted, and we want to always be that kind of help to those who need it. I know that if you are in that situation, that this encouragement can be helpful to you. So don't give up. I want to thank you for being part of our podcast family. If you have a comment or a question about this or any episode, I would love to hear from you. Go to our website, drcarolministries.com. You can leave me a confidential message there on the comments or podcast page. I read each one and respond to as many as I can personally. That means so much to me when I hear from you. And now, until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620, or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.